The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as people shuffled in, waiting for the session to begin. A tall clock ticked steadily on the back wall, the faint echo of its sound filling the heavy silence. The door opened gently, and all eyes turned toward a young black girl, barely 18, stepping inside with calm confidence. Her neatly pressed blazer, tidy bun, and the thick folder of legal documents in her hands made her look far more mature than her years. Yet, whispers rippled across the room, many assumed she was lost, or perhaps an intern assisting someone more experienced. Sitting near the front, a white police officer in uniform watched her with an amused smirk. He nudged the officer beside him and whispered, "Didn't know they let high schoolers play lawyer now." The two chuckled quietly, not bothering to hide their arrogance. To them, she was just another kid trying too hard to fit into a world she didn't belong to. But the girl ignored the murmurs, her posture upright and movements graceful as she walked toward the front of the courtroom. She took a seat at the prosecutor's table, organizing her files methodically. The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly thinking she had made a mistake. A few spectators exchanged puzzled looks, whispering to one another as they waited for someone to correct her. The atmosphere carried a strange mix of curiosity and quiet judgment, thick enough to feel. Then the sound of the bailiff's voice filled the air. "All rise, court is now in session." Everyone stood, and the judge entered, taking his place behind the bench. The officer leaned slightly toward the girl again, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Hey, sweetheart, defendant sit over there," he muttered with a smirk, nodding toward the other side. She didn't even turn her head. Instead, she adjusted her glasses and replied evenly, "Thank you, officer, but I'm exactly where I need to be." Her voice was calm but firm, and for a moment, the officer blinked in confusion. Something about her composure didn't match the image he had built in his mind. The judge began flipping through documents, unaware of the tension building just a few feet away. The girl looked forward, her expression unreadable, but deep within her eyes burned a quiet fire. What no one in that room knew yet was that this young woman was not just a visitor, she was about to change everyone's perception of who she truly was. The courtroom had settled into a tense calm. Papers rustled softly, and the steady hum of murmured voices faded as the hearing prepared to begin. The young girl sat at the prosecutor's table, focused and composed, reviewing her notes while the white police officer she was about to face leaned back in his chair, smirking with smug confidence. He had no idea who she truly was. To him, she was just a naive teenager pretending to belong in a place reserved for professionals. He leaned toward her, lowering his voice just enough to sound patronizing but loud enough for nearby people to hear. "You sure you're in the right seat, sweetheart?" His tone was dripping with sarcasm, each word coated in condescension. A few people in the courtroom chuckled quietly, entertained by his mockery. The bailiff shot them a disapproving glance, but the officer didn't seem to care. His laughter echoed faintly through the wooden walls, a cruel kind of arrogance that filled the air. The young girl didn't react right away. She simply paused, closed her folder with deliberate calm, and turned her head slightly to meet his gaze. Her eyes were steady, sharp, and far older than her age suggested. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm but polite. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, officer. Are you?" The words landed with quiet precision. The officer blinked, taken aback for a split second, his smirk faltering before he forced a laugh to cover it up. A few spectators exchanged surprised glances. The confidence in her voice didn't match her youthful appearance, and for the first time, a small doubt flickered in the officer's eyes. But he quickly brushed it off, whispering something under his breath about "kids these days," while shaking his head. The young girl turned away again, her expression unreadable, but there was a subtle smile tugging at the corner of her lips, not of amusement, but of quiet assurance. The judge entered the room, his robe flowing behind him, and everyone rose to their feet. As the session officially began, the officer adjusted his uniform, still wearing that half-cocked grin, unaware that the person he had just mocked was about to turn the entire courtroom upside down. The girl straightened her shoulders, ready to speak her truth, knowing that every word from this point on would shatter his arrogance piece by piece. The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom as the judge called the session to order. Everyone took their seats, and the air grew thick with anticipation. The white police officer sat confidently, still wearing that smug grin, glancing occasionally at the young black girl beside him. To him, this was a formality, another day, another hearing. He still believed she was out of place, maybe even someone's assistant or a nervous intern who'd wandered to the wrong table. The judge adjusted his glasses and began the introductions. Counsel, please state your name and who you represent. The defense lawyer stood first, speaking with routine professionalism. Then, all eyes turned to the young girl. The room seemed to pause, waiting for her to stammer or reveal she wasn't supposed to be there. But instead, she rose from her chair with composure far beyond her years. Her voice rang clear, firm, and unwavering. Your Honor, my name is Attorney Jasmine Carter. I represent the plaintiff in this case. For a moment, silence filled the entire courtroom. The officer blinked, his grin fading instantly. The judge looked up from his notes, visibly surprised. Spectators exchanged stunned looks, whispering among themselves in disbelief. The bailiff, who had earlier assumed she was just a witness, straightened up, almost embarrassed by his own assumptions. The officer's face flushed red as realization hit him. The same teen girl he had mocked minutes earlier was not only a real attorney but his opposing counsel. Jasmine's presence now commanded the room. She stood tall, her hands clasped behind her back, exuding quiet authority. The confidence in her eyes silenced every lingering doubt. The officer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier arrogance dissolving into visible unease. The smirk that once curled on his lips was gone, replaced by the weight of his mistake. The judge nodded slowly, impressed by her poise. Proceed, Counselor Carter. Jasmine gave a slight nod and began outlining the case with articulate precision, her tone calm yet powerful. Every word she spoke dismantled the image the officer had built of her. In that moment, the entire courtroom understood, this wasn't just a bright young woman. This was a prodigy, a legal mind sharper than anyone had imagined. And as the officer lowered his gaze, shame slowly replaced his pride. The next morning, the courtroom was packed again. Reporters, spectators, and even other attorneys had come to witness the young woman everyone was suddenly talking about. The tension was thick, but Jasmine Carter was calm. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, her expression was focused, her mind sharp as a blade. Across the room, the same officer sat stiffly, no longer confident, no longer smirking. His eyes darted nervously toward her, realizing that the tables had turned completely. When the judge signaled for the cross-examination to begin, Jasmine stood up, her movements precise and deliberate. She walked slowly toward the witness stand, each step echoing on the polished floor. Officer Daniels, she began, her tone calm but commanding, you stated under oath that you had no personal bias during the arrest. Is that correct? The officer cleared his throat, nodding quickly. That's correct, he muttered. Jasmine didn't blink. Then how do you explain the body cam footage where you called the suspect a street kid who'll never make it past community college? The courtroom fell silent. The officer froze, his mouth slightly open. Jasmine waited, her gaze fixed on him, unflinching, professional, but with the faintest trace of restrained anger. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. The officer tried to speak, fumbling for words. I was frustrated, he stammered, it was just, Jasmine cut in smoothly, her tone still polite but sharper now. So frustration gives you the right to humiliate a young black student exercising her rights? The officer looked away, his voice cracking under the pressure. The spectators watched in absolute silence, captivated by the reversal of power. This wasn't the timid girl they had seen earlier, this was a powerhouse of intellect and justice, methodically dismantling a man who had once mocked her. As the questioning continued, Jasmine exposed lie after lie, using his own statements and evidence against him. The defense attorney sat frozen, unable to interfere as the officer grew visibly shaken. Papers trembled in his hands, and sweat gathered on his forehead. Every answer he gave only made things worse. By the time Jasmine finished, the courtroom was silent again, not out of confusion, but respect. She looked toward the judge, gave a slight nod, and calmly returned to her seat. The officer sat motionless, the reality of his downfall sinking in. For the first time, he truly understood who he had been dealing with, not a teenager, not a kid, but a legal genius who had just destroyed his credibility with grace and brilliance. The tension in the courtroom was electric as everyone waited for the judge's verdict. The silence was so heavy that even the sound of papers rustling seemed too loud. Officer Daniel sat rigid in his chair, eyes downcast, his earlier arrogance completely gone. His lawyer avoided looking at him, knowing the outcome was inevitable. Across the room, Jasmine Carter sat quietly, her expression calm but her hands clasped together on the table, not from fear, but from the weight of justice about to be delivered. The judge cleared his throat, scanning the courtroom before speaking. After reviewing the evidence, including the body cam footage and testimony presented, this court finds Officer Daniels guilty of misconduct and racial bias in the execution of his duties. His gavel struck the sound block sharply, echoing like thunder. Gasps and murmurs erupted from the audience, but Jasmine remained still, her eyes steady on the judge. The officer's face drained of color. His jaw tightened as shame washed over him. For the first time, he looked at Jasmine, not with mockery, but with something closer to guilt. She returned his gaze briefly, not with anger, but with quiet dignity. She didn't need revenge. The truth had spoken louder than any insult ever could. As the judge continued, praising Jasmine for her professionalism and exceptional legal skill, the courtroom began to stir. One by one, people started to clap, slowly at first, then louder, until the entire room was on its feet. The sound filled the space, powerful and emotional. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, and the once skeptical faces now looked at her with admiration. Jasmine stood gracefully, gathering her files. She didn't smile boastfully, she simply nodded to the judge and whispered a soft, "Thank you." As she walked out, her head held high, the applause followed her down the corridor. The same courtroom where she had been underestimated now echoed with respect. Outside, sunlight spilled through the courthouse doors, wrapping her in a golden glow. A reporter called out, "Attorney Carter, how does it feel to make history?" She paused, turned slightly, and replied with a calm smile, "Justice doesn't care about age or color. It only listens to truth." With that, she walked into the light, a symbol of strength, brilliance, and the power of never letting prejudice define your worth.